From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today, K-State's Shane Werk will discuss selection criteria when purchasing beef bulls for spring breeding. He'll talk about the traits that he thinks you producers should concentrate on, those oriented toward individual cow-calf herd production goals. Also today, K-State's Keith Harmoney discusses mapping out a control game plan for old World Bluestem infestations in native pastures. He's done extensive research on herbicide and cultural management options for effectively suppressing this invasive species. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Jason Griffin will offer some basic shopping advice when purchasing new trees and shrubs for the home landscape. That's what's ahead on this Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. We're glad to have you along once more. And for you cow-calf producers, as we approach spring breeding time, for those of you who are operating a spring calving herd, that's not all that long from now, and many of you will possibly be in the market for new sire power for your herds. Well, our guest now is going to lend us some thoughts on making practical decisions in bull selection. What are some things to concentrate on there? He, in fact, is the manager of the Purebred Beef Unit in the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry here at K-State, Shane Werk. You've been talking about this with producers for a time, so we brought you over to address the topic. Shane, glad to have you aboard. When you think initially about what producers should consider as far as their pre-bull purchase strategies, what are some things that immediately come to mind?
Yeah, so first off, thanks for having me, Eric. Appreciate it. And so I think the first thing that producers should look at is evaluation of their program and kind of what their strengths and weaknesses are within that program, and that can help and go a long way in determining your needs from a specific standpoint and what traits to focus on when doing bull selection. And that can obviously involve lots of things. There's the obvious things of whether you're breeding a bull to heifers versus cows, but obviously can go on down the line, whether you feel like you want to keep replacement daughters or you want to focus on the terminal end of things for calves, sending that way, or if you sell calves at weaning, if you want to focus on just early growth. So there's tons of traits to look at, especially with the amount of information that we have with purebred livestock these days, especially cattle. But, yeah, I think that's the best place to start, is focusing on what you feel like you do well and what you maybe need to improve on as well.
As part of that self-analysis, then, does one dwell on the problems previously, troubleshoot, if you will? Say if dystocia has been a habitual concern, that would obviously fit into this.
Certainly, yeah. I think both equal parts of what you feel like you're doing well and need improvement on it because then you can focus on, like, for example, calving ease, if that's something and that's always something that's top of mind this day and age, and for a good reason for producers, then if that's been a problem, obviously you focus on a low birth weight sire. If you're breeding the cows, taking that bull home and turning them out with your mature cows, then you can stand a little more birth weight in your actual and, of course, in our EPDs, especially the amount of improvement we've made in that area in the last 20, 30 years as purebred breeders. You can take a little more birth weight, and with that you're going to get more pounds and be able to sell more product in the end, whether that's at weaning or, after backgrounding or all the way to an end product.
That's, though, been the delicate balance for so many producers, being sure that you manage the calving ease side of it to the best benefit of your calf crop, but not sacrificing growth and performance. And if you're looking at breeding heifers, well, there's that question again as well. How to walk that fine line.
Yeah, and that is tricky. And again, we've made a lot of improvement of making cattle that are more what we kind of use in the a term we kind of use is a spread bull, one that's lower in birth and higher in growth. And, of course, those are obviously antagonistic traits. So that takes some time and work to put selection pressure on both of those things. So, yeah, it's definitely a fine balance. I mean, calving ease is certainly important. A live calf is going to be worth a lot more than the alternative in a statement of the obvious. But with that said, you hate to leave some money on the table in terms of pounds that you can. So I think it goes back to what we kind of mentioned. If you feel like you've gotten along good and you've got some calving ease in your herd and you feel like that's been something that's not a problem, maybe you can, obviously you still want to remain disciplined probably on the calving ease end, but, you can look for those sires that can do a little more for you on growth, or maybe, if you do retain ownership on terminal traits in terms of carcass quality.
Apart from EPD values and working through all the data there, if one's at a sale and picking and choosing through the catalog, such things as the actual physical structure of that bull, is that something worth plugging into this? Yeah, certainly. And of course, historically, that's the way we've evaluated cattle. Now we do have EPDs and a lot of information, and there's potentially could be argued at some points maybe over information, but we've put a lot more data behind these EPDs lately, so EPDs get a lot of focus, and rightfully so. I mean, they're a good predictor of what that bull can do, and they're becoming better all the time and as more data and information flows into the system. But your question about the physical traits and the phenotype of that bull, it's still important. I mean, of course, there's just your basic functional, what I would call functional traits in terms of how the structure of that animal is built, how he can get out and move, whether that bull has some rib and some body depth and appears like he can, convert not only for himself, forage to body condition in pounds, but also obviously for his offspring to be able to do that. And then if he has some width and some muscle to him, those are kind of what we look for in terms of just pure functional traits that do make a lot of difference. And then there's more specific things, udder quality and, even within structure, foot quality. And these are all things that need to be looked at. I think, sometimes, and this is not a criticism in EPDs at all, because, like I said, they're good tools. But I think we need to, sometimes we can, a lot of the stuff you read, and as far as information and articles, we can kind of get a little too far on that, and maybe sometimes just select cattle strictly for that, when I think we need to have a little bit of balance on both the data and the physical appearance of the bull. And when talking about structure, does one think about it differently? Heifers versus mature cows? I mean, as far as structure, I guess to me, structure's a lot of how their movement is. So there's probably not a big difference, but I think what you're asking is, a lot of times bulls that are a little smoother shouldered and a little smoother in their makeup, they're going to be cattle that are going to be a little easier calving. So I think that comes into play there. And I think birth, when we talk about EPDs, I think our birth EPDs in terms of birth weight itself and calving ease direct are as accurate and as helpful of EPD as we have. So they are certainly good and important. And of course, actual birth weight comes into play somewhat. At one time that was a huge deciding factor, but now we do have more information as far as what the progeny have done back in behind that pedigree. So I think when I think of structure personally, it's just movement and just being able to get out and cover cows and take care of their business. And, everybody has different size pastures, but you think about some of these bigger pastures, bulls need to be able to get out and go and get the job done. They can't be feeling like their feet or legs are sore, or that's not going to do you a lot of good. So. Yeah, no question. One other aspect that may fall outside the realm of EPD values and such, the disposition of that animal. That's somewhat subjective, but that is valuable information there, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. And that's another one of these things that's gained more prominence here in recent years, and again, for good reason. A lot of producers are
are starting to get up in years a little bit, and not that anybody of any age wants to deal with wild ones. So that's a huge thing. That is more subjective. There is some EPDs for that. Those would be ones with a little less data points behind them. But that goes back to looking at that bull in the pen and kind of whatever your evaluation is, whatever your level of comfort is with that, that's certainly something to pay attention to. And I think like we discussed on EPDs and calving, that's another trait that a lot of improvement has been made, but it certainly still warrants evaluation on each producer's standpoint.
Do want to bring up, though, being sure that new sire that you're thinking about adding to the herd is processed through a breeding soundness examination. Yeah,
for sure. You want to buy bulls that have been evaluated by a vet. And again, that's not it's like a lot of things. It's not a perfect science. There's some give and take there. The test is designed for a little older bulls than we typically are doing. A lot of bulls get sold as yearlings. There is some 18-month-old bulls and some 2-year-olds that still as well. But you definitely want to know where they're at there. You don't want to go in blind on a situation like that.
Many moving parts is the point here. So one needs to process all of this somewhat well in advance of sale day, don't they?
Yeah, that's a good point. You want to kind of start doing it can even go back to if you sell your calves in the fall or the winter. It can start there, see how you did the year before, and take your preg data and all these kinds of things. And yeah, you don't want to just show up at a sale that morning and kind of start thinking what you want to do. It's prudent to go back and look and give yourself some time to process all the information and all the possibilities that are out there.
Set some goals.
Yep.
Shane, for these thoughts on producers contemplating what they need as they go about their bull purchases this spring, many thanks to you.
Yep, appreciate you having me.
He's Shane Werk, again, the manager of the Purebred Beef Unit here at Kansas State University. And Agriculture Today returns in a few moments on the K-State Radio Network. You're listening to Agriculture Today, and next up for you, a glance at what we'd have to term an invasive species in native grasslands, and not only in the tall grass prairie region, but in the mixed and short grass prairies of Kansas as well. It's known as Old World Bluestem, and our guest now has researched over several years' time means of contending with it and keeping it from ravaging our valued grazing areas. Keith Harmoney is with us. Keith is the range scientist at K-State's Agricultural Research Center at Hayes. Keith, we have visited about this before on the broadcast. It remains problematic for cattle grazers, doesn't it, Old World Bluestem?
Yeah, Old World Bluestem has been a problem for several years, and it's catching the attention of more people because folks are seeing that it is increasingly spreading over time, and folks have commented to me that it seems like it has really jumped in population within the last few years, and so there are more people noticing it throughout the state.
Describe it, if you would, and its aggressive nature as it tends to spread and become more vigorous in our grasslands.
Well, Old World Bluestems are a class of grass species that were introduced from the Old World, basically the Mediterranean region, northern Africa, parts of Asia, and also Australia. And there's two main species of these Old World Bluestems, and one of them is what's called Caucasian Old World Bluestem, and the other one is yellow or King Ranch Old World Bluestem. Early in the springtime, they'll have a real pale green, almost yellowish type leaf compared to our native grasses. But then as they mature, they get a reddish or pinkish tint seed head on them, and that usually occurs earlier than our native tall grass and midgrass species. And then once that seed matures and drops off, the culms or the stems that have formed, they begin to bleach out, and they will become almost whitish, and they will stay that way from late summer all the way through the wintertime until growth the next year.
Now, for those who aren't acquainted with this problem, they might ask, what is the issue here? It's a grass amidst other native grasses out there, and it has to do with grazing selectivity on the part of the cattle, doesn't it?
That is part of the problem, yes. These Old World Bluestems, they are actually high-quality forage when young, but that time period does not last very long. Once they start to elongate their stems and mature, they lose their palatability quickly, and animals will select native species instead of the Old World Bluestems. And that causes a problem then when native species and these Old World Bluestems are mixed together in the same area, because the natives can then tend to be overused. And these Old World Bluestems, once they're avoided by animals late in the growing season, the next year that old, dead, dry material carries over, and animals do not want to go into that old, dead, dry material and select for any new growth that's within that patch. So these patches can accumulate old, dead, dry material over a long period of time unless pastures are burned or something else is done to remove that old, dead material.
And they can really put pressure on native grasses in that they are prolific seed producers, are they not?
Yes, that's one of the main ways that they spread, is that they are prolific seed producers. And also they're able to establish in areas that tend to be more dry. They have a good ability to germinate under drier conditions than what some of our native species are able to do, and they can persist under these drier conditions as well. They're able to extract moisture from what seems to be fairly dry soil. So once they get established, they are able to persist and grow very well compared to our native species.
Well, that dashed an immediate hope that our current extremely dry weather in Kansas might put a dent in Old World Bluestem. Doesn't sound like that's the case.
No, they're very well adapted to dry, hot conditions.
Yeah. Then, when we talk control of Old World Bluestem, several approaches on the chemical side and on the cultural management side. Let's start with herbicide treatments. You have actually studied that in recent years, Keith.
Yeah, myself and also Walt Fick on the main campus at Manhattan have both studied some herbicide activity on Old World Bluestems, and the two main chemistries that we found to have any sort of control of Old World Bluestem have been glyphosate products and imazapyr. Glyphosate is one that has adequate control, but it also is non-selective, so it will kill most all other vegetation that it's treated on. Imazapyr, on the other hand, has shown us good control of Old World Bluestem, but it also has shown that native tallgrass and midgrass species can be tolerant of it. Our desirable grasses, big bluestem, Indian grass, switchgrass, little bluestem, Cytodes grama, those are all rather tolerable of imazapyr at mid to lower rates.
If one were to employ imazapyr, in this case then, what would be the timing of that application, the preferred schedule there?
The timing that we've found so far that has worked well has been the time period after it's formed 5 leaves on the young growing plant. So it's reaching the point where it's getting all of its leaf material out there and available to capture sunlight, but before the plant starts to elongate its stems. So it's that period where it's becoming green and covering the soil and really leafy, and that way it's able to absorb as much of the herbicide as possible.
Well, then other approaches, Keith, does prescribed burning at all aid in controlling Old World Bluestem?
Yeah, there's been several studies looking at burning and times of burns on controlling Old World Bluestems. There's been studies on spring burning and dormant season burning as well as growing season burns. And out of all those studies, the growing season burns have tended to be the ones that have shown the most promise. There's even been some variation or variability in success of those growing season burns. In the studies that I've seen from down south in Texas and also from Dr. Casey Olson and his graduate students there in Manhattan in some mixed grass areas of central Kansas. Those studies that have the highest fuel loads and also appear to have the slowest moving fires have resulted in the most control. And that's just the general summary of what I've seen in all those studies put together.
So we're talking late summer burns largely here for effectiveness.
Yes, we'd be talking late summer, probably middle to end of August to first part of September is the time period that those have seemed to be most successful. I would say that fuel load and having a slow burn to retain heat has been the most dominant factors as far as their success.
Want to ask as well, grazing management in and of itself, be it forced grazing, intensive managed grazing, would that help at all against this problem?
Well, old world bluestems in general are very tolerable of heavy and extensive defoliation. We have some areas out here in western Kansas that have been defoliated weekly or biweekly throughout the summer, and those areas have not declined in old world bluestem population whatsoever and actually have probably increased over time. The one thing that defoliation does help with, though, is getting rid of old dead material of the old world bluestem that carries over from one year to the next. So defoliating the area by either heavy grazing or mowing or burning before it's treated with a herbicide has been shown to increase the control of the old world bluestem from the herbicide. And that's because it's only green leafy material that's intercepting the herbicide and it's uptaking that herbicide rather than that herbicide falling on old dead leaves and old dead stems that basically aren't going to get translocated into the root system of that plant. So defoliation does help in that way culturally.
Nonetheless, putting together a control and management plan here before we get into the grazing season sounds like it may be warranted. Doing nothing probably won't be the route to go here.
Yeah, doing nothing. We've monitored some patches out here in our western Kansas property and found that over 8 years' time and 9 years' time that these old world bluestem patches increased in size by 2.5 times to almost 3.5 times their original size.
That should say volumes to a producer as to the seriousness of this invasive species. You can learn more about the research that K-State has done in this area of old world bluestem control and management through various means out of the Department of Agronomy and the Department of Animal Sciences and Industry likewise here at K-State. Researchers in both have taken a hard look at this problem and possible solutions to it. Keith, thank you. We appreciate the overview right here.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on.
Keith Harmoney there. Keith is the range scientist at K-State's Agriculture Research Center at Hayes. And we'll be back with more on Agriculture Today. Welcome back to Agriculture Today and our weekly horticulture segment. And we're in the spirit of making additions to the home landscape through wise selection of new ornamental plant material. And we've invited in for this discussion Jason Griffin, K-State horticulturist and the director of the John C. Pear Horticulture Center down near Wichita. Jason, this is right in your wheelhouse, talking about ornamentals here. There are a ton of new things out there every year in the catalogs and such. What you want to do today is pass along some suggestions to homeowners on going about prudent selections.
Sure. Thanks again for having me, Eric. So yeah, we walk through those catalogs and those magazines, and they're just filled with glossy photos of beautiful plants. And it's really tempting to run to your local nursery and say, I want one of those. I want 4 of those. Make sure before you invest in that new plant that it's one that'll survive here. So we have recommended lists out there. They're not hard to find through K-State Research and Extension. And the new plants, if you look through those catalogs, are almost always new cultivars of species that are already out there. Look and see what is that species, and does that species do well here? If it's a weeping form or it's a columnar form or it's got a different flower color or different fall color, that's great. But the first thing to know is to make sure that that species will survive in your area.
How to know that, though? What information is out there that one can research?
Some of the first things we look at, obviously, is cold hardiness, the cold hardiness zone maps. There's also a heat hardiness zone map, which is worth looking at because in Kansas, we do deal with some heat in the summer occasionally. Looking at the drought and moisture adaptability of the species. Some species do well in moist soils and some do not do well in moist soils, and vice versa with drought. Think about the microclimates of your landscape. If it's near a downspout, if it's near a low spot where moisture will collect, or if it happens to be on a ridge or on a crowned area that's going to drain well, it's going to be more droughty there. If you're a new homeowner and you've got a brand new home with no trees and you're looking to just get something started, you might not want to go for the fanciest plant out there. You want to go for the rock solid plant, shade tree, shrubs, just to get some shade and to get some relief from the wind and the sun. So depending on where you are, how old your landscape is, what sort of microclimates you can create in your own landscape can help guide you towards which new plants you should be looking for.
So again, adaptability is priority one. Does one also think about other things, Jason? The growth rate of that plant and whether it'll meet their expectations?
Absolutely. Growth rate and ultimate size. You don't want a large tree too close to the house. You don't want a large tree under power lines. Keep them out of the city right away, perhaps. There's lots of things to consider. If you want a really, really fast-growing plant, those are out there. Just be forewarned that the faster they grow, usually the weaker they are. So the slower-growing trees tend to be a little bit stronger and have stronger branches.
Pest resistance, is that in the mix here too?
Always. We hope that most of the plants that you find on the market are, in general, disease and insect resistant, but not all of them are. Let's just take, for instance, in this part of the state, we don't have a lot of Japanese beetles down here in south central Kansas. So there are some trees we can use that you wouldn't dare use in the Kansas City area because of Japanese beetle presence. So yes, always consider insect and disease pressure.
And where do folks go to tap into those extensive resources that, as you mentioned, K-State Research and Extension can provide for this purpose?
Check with your local county office. Most of them have a horticulture agent or at least somebody whose responsibilities are in horticulture. Also, if you go to ksu.edu/ornamentals, it comes up with all of our recommended plant lists.
ksu.edu/ornamentals. It's that simple to get into that list. Jason, good basic thoughts that folks should keep in mind as they go about shopping for ornamental plant material very soon now. Thanks for your time right here.
Thanks for having me.
K-State Research and Extension horticulturist Jason Griffin with that advice on this week's horticulture segment. Our time's away once more. Thanks as always for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.